Defense Minister. Welcome to Washington.
Thank you very much, Ravi.
When did you get in?
This morning. I flew up here with my Prime Minister.
Right, so I have the advantage of not being jet-lagged. I'm going to begin with the elephant in the room. This is obviously a week where a lot of NATO leaders are in town, and one of the big themes is 2% of GDP for every single country being the floor, not the ceiling, for defense spending. And Canada's is, I think, at about 1.3% and change.
It is at the moment. I introduced a new defense policy update for my government and with a budget that will see my defense budget rise by 27% next year over this.
My quick math tells me that still takes you to 1.7.
And that's exactly where it takes me. But let me acknowledge to you, NATO's right. Every country, member of NATO, has to do more, and we're committed to doing more. We are also committed to the 2% expenditure at GDP. One of the challenges, I think every defense minister, and I get to meet with them all on a regular basis, it's not just a matter of how much you spend, but it's a matter of spending it well and making sure that you can produce real value for our armed forces, for our NATO alliance and all of our partners, but also for our taxpayers. And I need to be able to demonstrate, like, I think I've got a very clear path. I know exactly what I need to invest in. I've got to replace my destroyers, my naval ships. I've got to replace our submarines. I've signed contracts for almost 200 new aircraft for my Air Force just in the past year and a half. But I've got to make sure that we can actually deliver on those commitments and create that credibly. You know, I've often said, I think the two great challenges every defense minister has is getting the money and spending the money well. And so all that is to say, Canada understands its obligation. I feel that responsibility gravely, and we're working really hard. The defense policy update that we've just produced moves us forward very substantially and doesn't get us entirely where we need to go. But there are things in that document as well that talks about the investments we know we have to make. Replacing the submarines, for example, creating a new integrated air and missile defense system for Canada's responsibility in North America. All of those things inevitably take me over 2%.
So, but there are people in this town who will say that is a lot of words, and what you're saying is we will be more efficient. The subtext could be that other countries are not. But the criticism still remains. I mean, America's defense spending is way north of 2%.
Yes.
That Canada might be seen as a free rider.
And I have no intention of Canada being a free rider. First of all, we've already made a commitment to NORAD. NORAD is our most important relationship here in North America with the United States. We're investing nearly $40 billion into NORAD modernization, including over-the-horizon radar systems, new satellite systems, a number of very significant capabilities. We understand our responsibility to that relationship. Similarly, in Europe and in NATO, Canada is leading the forward enhanced presence in Latvia. We're making very significant investments there. I'm in complete agreement with my allies that Canada must do more. The day I got this job, I've very publicly taken that position. We must do more, and we will do more. I've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we spend that money well, that we create the capabilities that we require. One of the challenges I'm also facing is we've got some real staffing challenges in the Canadian Armed Forces. I've got to address that problem so I can have sailors on those ships, people to fly those planes, soldiers to do the important work that we're asking them to do. And so all of that work is, I think we have a very aggressive plan to move forward. I'm very confident that it's going to bring us to that threshold, but I think it also has to be a credible plan. It has to be verifiable to our allies. It can't just be an aspirational approach. I think you've got to really come out and say, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to get it done. And I'm hoping that over the course of the next few days, I'll be able to share that credible, verifiable plan with our allies to provide them with assurances that Canada understands its responsibility and we're going to live up to our responsibilities.
All right. Well, you know, there'll be a lot of defense ministers in town this week who will ask you that question, and you've previewed your answer. I want to talk about the Arctic as part of, you know, Canada's defense arena and, you know, an increasing priority for NATO. Before I go there, one more elephant in the room.
Of course.
You know, in the last 2 weeks, a lot has happened in the United States. I'm sure you've been watching it closely. there's a greater likelihood that Donald Trump will be president. Anything could happen, but the polls suggest that there's a greater likelihood. This is a former president, potentially future president, who has called your prime minister two-faced. He has called him a whole bunch of other words as well, and has said he's very disappointed in him. How worried is your government about a potential second Trump term?
I was a minister in government during the first Trump term. I also believe very strongly, first of all, with respect to the American election, I have great confidence in Americans to make whatever decision, and we'll respect whatever decision they may make. But I also know the strength of America, and it includes the White House, obviously, and the president, but it's also the institutions. It's your Congress, it's your judiciary. I've had the opportunity over the course of a very long career in public safety and public security to work very closely with America. I have great confidence in your institutions and the people that lead those institutions. I remain confident. Canada will always be a good partner to the United States, and the United States has been our closest ally and our dearest friend.
Yeah, you really have been doing this for a long time, very diplomatic. Okay, the Arctic. Talk to me about how you are seeing that as a new arena and the threat of Russia from the other side, as it were.
Well, first of all, when I became the defense minister, most of the work that we had done previously in defense policies, to me it looked an awful lot like a shopping list, and it did not tell our story. It didn't tell the story of Canada. And so when I got this job, and I got my people to start really thinking about what are our real responsibilities. We have obviously responsibilities in Europe and NATO. We have new responsibilities in the Indo-Pacific because we're both an Atlantic and a Pacific nation. But I think most closely related to our identity as a nation is we're an Arctic nation. And I think for very many years, we've relied on the fact that we are surrounded by 3 oceans, one of which was mostly frozen most of the time. And we also had the benefit of a superpower and a very friendly neighbor.
And geography.
And geography.
Amazing geography.
We had remarkable geography. And almost everything the Canadian Armed Forces has done over the last 150 years has been expeditionary.
Right.
It's been, we've never been really invaded as a country. We've had a couple of little incursions, but nothing serious. And so, one of the things that we recognize, though, with climate change in particular, is that our Arctic is becoming far more accessible. And we used to think, I think naively, that maintaining our sovereignty and security in the Arctic was occasionally flying a plane overhead or having a ship go by when the ice was out. But we believe with climate change, first of all, the Arctic is warming at 4 times the global rate. Secondly, the Arctic Ocean, by 2050, could very easily be the main point of passage between Europe and Asia.
That just blows my mind.
And it should. For us, it creates both opportunity and challenge. And what we are seeing among adversaries, Russia and China in particular, is a far more assertive approach into what we have always considered our Arctic. And I know it's a concern for America in Alaska. It's a concern for Greenland and the Danes. It's a concern for our new NATO allies in Finland and Sweden, and obviously in Norway and Iceland. But I think the incursions that we're seeing, the effort of China, which now calls itself a near Arctic nation, they're sending ships into the region. They're dual-purpose ships, but they're gathering intelligence. They're also working very hard to try to invest in critical infrastructure, our critical minerals. It is a concern to us, and frankly, I believe that we have a responsibility not just to assert our sovereignty, but to be prepared to defend it.
How have things changed in the last year with Sweden and Finland joining NATO?
Very positively, in my opinion. First of all, I've met a number of times with all of the Nordic and Arctic nations. I think what we're starting to see clearly within NATO, there's an obvious and necessary focus on the Eastern Front with Russia. But we're also recognizing the northern frontier of NATO, which is Norway, Finland, Sweden, the Danes, Iceland, us and America, all have a responsibility there. Canada has the largest maritime border with Russia of any country in the world. And frankly, we're not persistently present there. And so one of the things I've come forward with in our new national defense policy is significant new investments in capability to create northern support hubs to build up our domain awareness through over-the-horizon radar investments, but also creating integrated air and missile defense systems, new maritime capabilities, new maritime sensors. Lots of very significant investments are going to be necessary. But I think there's a huge opportunity with Finland and Sweden particularly coming in. Norway's always been a strong partner. An acknowledgement among all the Arctic nations that we can do better together.
Just to come back to the money, because you were talking about investments there, 27% is a lot, right? Have you been able to convince the Canadian population of the importance of these investments? Yeah. Because obviously it takes away from other stuff.
Well, and I'll tell you, when I first got into this job, we did some polling on it, and about less than a third of Canadians really supported defense spending. And it didn't make the top 20 list of priorities. But we've had a very robust conversation with Canadians over the past year. We've talked about not just the risks. Frankly, I don't like scaring people. I'm a police chief, and in my earlier life, and I just don't like making people afraid. But at the same time, you need to make them aware of the challenges that we face and of our responsibilities. And what we've seen just over the past year in Canada, support for defense spending has more than doubled. It's over 65% right now. And it's gone from not on the top 20 list of spending priorities into the top 5. And so I think that the conversation has been a good one with Canadians. There's a good understanding that we have to make these investments, and it's not just. I will confess to you, it's kind of difficult to go and explain to your population that we need to spend this much money to meet a mathematical formula. You've got to talk about why, and you've got to talk about how.
Well, and also the threat is much further away. You're not Poland.
We're not, but the threat's coming to our door. And it's because the Arctic, as I've said, is becoming far more accessible than it was ever in the past. And the nature of technology and conflict is changing as well. And so what we're seeing, we saw with the use of drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and Iran's attack on Israel. We see it every single day in the Ukraine. And we see it through asymmetrical warfare, which includes cyber attacks. Like, all of these things is making our security a greater challenge. And you know, what we understand that we need to do is we need to make our adversaries think twice before they just come and take advantage of the opportunity that exists in North America. I also very mindful I have responsibilities to my American colleagues as well. They've made a huge investment in security for the Beaufort and the Bering in Alaska. But right now, there's not an awful lot between Alaska and Greenland, and that's my responsibility, and we're going to live up to it.
They'll be listening to you this week. We haven't talked about China much, but very quickly, you know, in this town, there's been a real shift in attitudes towards China in the last 5 years. Europe, it's a bit more mixed. Where does Canada sit?
I have gone to NATO a number of times. I had a number of conversations. I was in Singapore just last month. I met with the Chinese defense minister. I told him that I've been sending my ships through the Taiwan Strait. We do it with the Americans. We do it with a number of allies because we believe in the importance of defending the principle of freedom of navigation in international waterways. We talked about, actually, I had a very candid conversation with my counterpart about foreign interference in our domestic, in our elections, against our critical infrastructure, some of the cyber attacks that we have seen, which we believe are done either by the PRC or by their proxies. And we talked about, frankly, the coercive activities that they engage in against our citizens who may be of Chinese descent, none of which is acceptable. And I think it's important to have those conversations with them. And at the same time, I think being aware of those risks and responding appropriately. I'm not trying to start a fight, I'm trying to prevent one. And I think by being strong and by being united with our NATO and American partners and in the Indo-Pacific, I think everybody's trying, certainly in the Indo-Pacific, they're trying to find that place where, you know, between America and China and where the right place to be. I know where my place is in that relationship, and of course it's our closest ally and partners is obviously with the United States. But in the defense of North America, you may recall the Chinese sent surveillance balloons over top of the continent. That was concerning. We've also seen, as I said, dual-use ships going into the Arctic Ocean, and you know, clearly intelligence gathering and mapping And we've seen a number of efforts that they've made to try to invest in our critical infrastructure. They've done it around the world, but we're taking the steps necessary to defend our interests. And I think there's more to be done. Canada, I believe, has been strong in its response and needs to be even stronger among our allies.
Last question, India. This is an area of great divergence between Canada and the United States. The US and India have been improving their relationship over the last 20 years. Canada's in the last 18 months has declined precipitously. What do you think is going to change? Modi just won another 5 years. It's a difficult relationship. How do you think that's going to change?
It's a difficult relationship, but it's an important relationship. Canada needs India, and I believe India needs Canada as well. First of all, we have a very substantial Indian diaspora in Canada, and it's an important relationship to those Canadians as well. But the trade relationship, I think we've got some work to do. There are some challenges. I think you'd acknowledge that. There have been some challenges with respect to the actions and the evidence of the Indian government engaging with part of our Indian diaspora in Canada.
This was an assassination,
and the
which
assassination
they deny. You
Najjar.
claim that India was responsible.
But at the same time, I would also acknowledge to you that relationship is an important one. And I think what mature governments do is what we're doing now, is working through that relationship. Yes, they have strong areas of divergence where we just fundamentally disagree. But at the same time, I think we have a responsibility to the future of both of our countries, is to work it out and to find a way to reconcile that so it's mutually respectful. And at the same time, they've got work to do. And I think, by the way, on the defense side, one of the things that I've been encouraging is my military to reach out and maintain those relationships. I think there are opportunities to the extent possible, to normalize the relationship. Now, while we still reconcile the challenges that exist between us, but I think it's very much in my country's national interest and in India's interest that we find a way to work through the challenges that we face between us and make it work. And I think that's the responsible, even frankly with all of the difficulties we have with China. I would also acknowledge China as a very significant economic power in this country and an emerging military power as well. It is incumbent upon us to find ways to peacefully coexist and at the same time draw very clear lines about what is acceptable and what is not.
Here's to that. Minister Blair, real pleasure.
Thank you, Ravi.
Please welcome to the stage the Defense Innovation